Kumlenen, a block Gemara. Today's daf is daf Hey Amud Aleph, and we are up to the top of the page. Amar Rav. Rav says, Megilah Bismana. If you read Megilah, remember we just learned now that there's a range of days that one can read the Megilah if you're in the village. So he says as follows: Megilah Zman. If you read Megilah in its right time, daf Hey Amud Aleph on the top of the page. Then you don't have to have a minyan. You can read it on your own because everybody's going to be reading at the same time, and that's sufficient for Pesum Nisa. However, Shaloi Bizman, if you're reading it early, then Ba'asara, you have to have a minyan in order to have Pesum Nisa. And because of this, that's why some of the Rishonim learned that the Kfarim at night, so in the day, Monday, Thursday, they read Megillah in town with minyan, but at night, they didn't have to read Megillah at all. Well, they read it at home and made a special dispensation. Two opinions. Rav Asi Amar, Rav Asi says, Bein Bismana, Bein Shalei Bismana Sara. It's not enough that everybody reads the Megillah at the same time. Pesum Nisa is when you have a number of people congregating together. So you should have a minyan. And we spoke about yesterday, Machlekes Rishonim, that a woman can be counted in a minyan for Mikra Megillah. Many of the Rishonim hold they can. The Ritva, the Miri, the Ran. Havi Uvda, there was a story. The Chosh Le Rav, the one who said that you don't need a minyan on Purim. Rav was once who was Machmir Lahad Rav Asi, and he followed what Rav Asi said, but he made sure he had a minyan. Says the Gemara, you're telling me that Rav holds that you don't need a minyan on Purim, but you do need a minyan if it's prior to Purim. When Rav actually say that, but the son of Shmuel, the son of Shil, say the name of Rav. Purim Shechol Lias b'Shabbos. If Purim falls on a Shabbos, in the old days when they followed the Eidim, Erev Shabbos Zmanim. The time is Erev Shabbos. The time for Megillah is Erev Shabbos. But it's a strange lashon. Erev Shabbos is this time. Erev Shabbos Zmanim. Well, Shabbos Zmanim. What do you mean Erev Shabbos is the time? The time is Shabbos, but we're allowing you to, we're going to bring it forward because, but we're greater up. What do you mean Erev Shabbos is this time? Isn't it time of Elalav? Isn't it Hachikamar? It must be. Because by saying Erev Shabbos Manu, it sounds like you're saying that the Anchi Knesset Agdola, when they fixed the days of Purim, they said normally it's 14, but it falls on a Shabbos, the time is 13. Now, what's wrong? Maybe that's exactly what they said. So Rashi says a very interesting thing here, because other Rishonim say different things in other Masechtas, not here. Rashi says, why don't we read Megillah on Shabbos? Because it's Gzeira de Rabbah. The Gzeira of Rabbah was scared you might take Megillah out in the street and carry. Says Rashi, that Gzeira de Rabbah did not exist in the times of Anchi Knesset Agdola. It did not exist in time of Anshei Knesset Agdola, and therefore they were able to read Megillah on Shabbos. So it couldn't have been the Anshei Knesset Agdola who said, bring it forward. And even though we lived in Gemara Sukkah, they're all about Gzeira de Rabbah, and at the times of the Beis Hamikdash, they knew for sure when a Chodesh is, so for the first day Sukkah, they would still bench Shalom Shabbos. So during the second Beis Hamikdash, they already had Gzeira de Rabbah. In other words, it didn't start with Rabbah. It started way before him, but according to Rashi here, it definitely started after the period of Anshei Knesset Agdola. There was sometime during the second Beis Hamikdash. Don't know who actually came up with Gzeira de Rabbah. Maybe the Rabbah's one who gave the reason for it. That's why it's called Gzeira de Rabbah. But it exists in the times of Beis Hamikdash, but not in the times of Anshei Knesset Agdola. So what do you mean Erev Shabbos Zmanamu? Anshei Knesset Agdola never anticipated, never had a problem, an issue with Shabbos. It would have remained on the 14th, which is Shabbos. So what do you mean Erev Shabbos Zmanim? Elav HaKam must mean the following. Shalei Bizmanim is Kizmanim, to tell you that halachically, whatever day you read it, it has the same din as if you read it on the right time. Because that is the time. Whatever day you choose to read the Megillah, that is the right time. Which means what? In what reference? Rav holds on the right time, you don't need a minyan. So obviously what he's trying to say is, whenever you read it, you don't need a minyan. So it's a question from Rav on Rav. Because Rav said on top of the page that if it's Loi Bizman, if you're reading it early, you have to read it with a minyan. Mazman will be Yachid after you don't need a minyan. So you misunderstood. Line up. We're not talking about here whether you should have a minyan or not. That's what you mean, Erev Shabbos Manim. Elamai Erev Shabbos Manim. If you remember yesterday, we had a few opinions that said that once you take it out of Shabbos, you bring it forward to Thursday. Says Rab, no. I want you to know that Erev Shabbos is the right time to read it, not on Thursday. La Fukim and the Rebbe. No, but he said, bring it forward to Thursday. Hakamash the Erev Shabbos Manim. Erev Shabbos is its time. Mishnah. What's the definition of a city? Any city that has 10 batlonim. Now, yesterday, Rashi said that Asara Batlanim, or 2 days ago, sorry. Rashi said, what does Asara Batlanim mean? People that are always available to daven with a minyan. Doesn't have to be, they can be also workers, but they always come to minyan, the Ran says. But here Rashi says, interesting, that Rashi says in the first line, the white lines, Rashi says that they don't work and they get paid by the community to be called minyan yidden, that that's their job. They're actually getting paid, that they should always be available in shuls so that there's a minyan. So when the Abisha comes to a shul, he can never complain, I don't have a minyan in shul. There'll always be a minyan in shul. So what's a city that has Tembatlani, Pachim, Mekanagos, and has a village? Yesef Shuma Levi said the same thing. So the Gemara already explains 2 days ago. Shuma Levi was saying that not only an ear needs Tembatlani, that even a krach needs, a metropolis needs Tembatlanim. Even though you always have people going through, you always have a minyan, but he needs locals. And then we had the Machlekes Hashanim that includes even a walled city or not, if you need 10 batlanim. Says in one mission further, the following we say, let's say you can't do it on the right day, bring it forward, that was man, but certain things we say you cannot do on the right day, push it over. For example, man, I'd say koinim, we talked about that there's certain days that they koinim tinus, that they used to celebrate because they brought wood and they had a whole festive day. If the day that they were supposed to have their Yom Tov didn't work out on Shabbos, they pushed it off a day. But Tisha B'Av also, if you cannot do it on Shabbos, you push it off a day. Rashi is over here. It's not only Tisha B'Av, but all fast days, because we don't want to bring forward Paranis, as Gemara will explain. And Rashi includes here Asara B'Tevis as well, and if it would fall on a Shabbos, we would push it off. Some others say Asara B'Tevis is stricter, and Asara B'Tevis you would not push off, you would actually leave it on his day. But Rashi clearly says here that if Asara B'Tevis falls on a Shabbos, you would delay it. Chagiga, the Korban Chagiga, if Yom Tov, let's say, falls on a Shabbos, then the Korban Chagiga, you don't bring a Shabbos, you wait till Sunday. Why? Because you have the entire 7 days to make it up. So why bring in a Shabbos? And so too, the Hakel, the mitzvah of Hakel, which is after the first days of Yom Tov, is if it falls on a Shabbos, you bring it the next day. Why? Because you have to build a wooden platform and all that. And you don't want to do that before Yom Tov, as the Gemara says, Sham says, because then it'll be very tight space. There's very limited space in the base of English. You don't want to make everybody feel, what do you call it, eng and uncomfortable if you can wait. Is ma'achel, all of these we delay instead of bringing forward. And even though we say that when it comes to Purim, we bring forward and we don't delay, mutorin behesped ubetainis. Still, let's say you're bringing forward to Monday, but that day Monday is not really Purim, so you're allowed to fast, you're allowed to eulogize, even on Purim, so you're not allowed to. Umatonis levyoni. Matos of Yoni would mean that, that's what we learned yesterday, that the poor people are, they know when it comes to Megillah, they're expecting Matos of Yoni, so Matos of Yoni is tagged to Mikra Megillah. The Suda is on the right day. Amr says, we also had this before. When do we say that the villagers can bring in early if they generally come in on Monday and Thursday? They generally don't come, and you're going to force them to come to the city. So how did you help anybody? In then you might as well read it at the right time. If you're going to come to the city anyway, when you're not accustomed to it, so why bring it forward? Do it on the right time. Gemara. Then we learned Asara Batlani basic says Be'elo Magdim Lamachin. And when it says Asara Batlani, we mean in shul. So that's what the Gemara is adding. What Asara Batlani mean in shul? As Rashi says, they were hired to spend that free time in shul. You bring forward my time, but why? It's possible you have a Purim, you're not allowed to pass after the 15th day, you can't go beyond that. How do you know if a person says, I'm not going to drink wine for a whole year? How do you know it doesn't mean a solar year, but rather it means a lunar year, so 12 months to the day? And for example, if you're in the end of the first day of Nisan, then the following first day of Nisan, it's permitted, even though the solar year has another few days, another 10, 11 days going to it. So he says it here, we go by the lunar calendar, that's our year. We don't go by the solar calendar. And the same thing is you say for a month. You say to a woman, if somebody says to a woman, I'm going to give you a get. If I'm not back within a month, the get becomes valid. And that month was a 29-day month. But you came before the 20, because we know that a real month is 29 and a half days and 793 chalakim. You came 29 days and 2 hours. but it's already declared Rosh Chodesh. But really, it's not Rosh Chodesh yet. If you could follow the moon exactly, you still have a half a day. It's only because we can't do that. So 1 month is Malay, 1 month is 30 days, 1 month is 29 days. It doesn't matter. We don't count by the hours. You go by the days. It says Ad Chodesh Yamim. Yom Ad Chash Chodashim. We count by days. We add to the Chash Chodashim. We don't calculate by the hour. I was Manasseh Kohen, Tisha B'Av, Chagiga, Hakamach, all of these you delay instead of bring forward. Tisha B'Av, I understand why, because I do make put on Islam Makadmi. We don't want to bring forward. Tisha B'Av is a very sad day and it's a terrible tragedy. Why would you want to bring it forward? Chagiga, Bahakel, again. Chagiga, you cannot bring it forward. If Yom Tov falls on Shabbos, you can't do it Erev Yom Tov or Erev Shabbos because it's not Yom Tov yet. Well, how can you do that? We understand. And Hakel, the same thing. It's not yet the Chiyuv. So that's the logic behind all this. Tana we learned is chagiga. The whole zman chagiga and the entire time that you can bring the chagiga, which is tayot ma'ach. Okay, mishlem chagiga. I understand chagiga. I understand. It said you delay chagiga falls on Shabbos. The mikla b'Shabbat ma'achla. If the first day Yom Tov falls on Shabbos, you delay it. Lebasa Shabbat to after Shabbos. Elazman Chagiga Mai. What do you mean the time of Chagiga? What does that mean? This is exactly what the Brisa means. Chagiga b'Shabbos. A Chagiga which falls out on Shabbos. The first day Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos. Remember, there's another carbon. It says a possible you should never see me come empty-handed. You have to bring with you a carbon Oyla Sriya. And we had a big, we said an Oyla Sriya you cannot really bring on Shabbos because nobody eats from it, and therefore even Beis Hillel is made that you cannot have an oil tree on Shabbos. So is Chagiga b'Shabbos, Chagiga on Shabbos, and oil zriyah, when it comes to an oil zriyah. What about Yom Tov? It's not Shabbos. What about Yom Tov? So here, had a machlekes b'Shammai. So b'Shammai says you cannot bring a Chagiga in Yom Tov, even though you eat from it, because it says it's l'gavoya, belongs to Hashem. And the Torah says that you can eat yem lechem. Not that this belongs to Hashem, you cannot eat it. And Beis Hillel says you could, because since you're eating from it, good enough. So, but it says when it says man chagiga ma'achrin, when he says over here that this man chagiga, he means the time of Yom Tov is talking about the oilus riyah on the first day Yom Tov. That even on Yom Tov, this man chagiga ma'achrin, mani who holds that b'Shammai. Beishamai says that the oilus riyah is brought later on. Okay, why? Beishamai says Navin Shlam Yom Tov. You're allowed to bring a korban shlamim on Yom Tov because you're going to eat from it. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. So when it says man chagiga, we mean there's another Yom Tov that comes out at the same time that you have to bring korban chagiga, and that's the oilus riyah, which is due on Yom Tov. It says a pasuk layiru panai reikam. And but Shammai says on Yom Tov you cannot bring it because since nobody can eat from it, Shammai says you cannot bring it. You wait till tomorrow. He still says you could bring it if it's due today on Yom Tov. You bring it today. So Shammai says maybe in shlamim you could bring on Yom Tov because you're going to eat it. And so it comes under the umbrella of asher yachol chol nefesh, but the ain't same kind of lame. Shammai holds that you don't need take it for the smicha shchita. You don't need that the smicha should be right next to the shchita. So he says, do the smicha, lean your hands on the animal the day prior. You cannot bring an oile, you cannot bring because you're not going to eat from it, and it belongs to the Eibishter. However, Beis Hillel says maybe in shlamim the oile is the same chalem. Beis Hillel says you can bring a shlamim. You can also bring the oile zeriah because it's due today. It says a pasuk lochem, and we dash in Gemara Beili lochem beloy legboy not today. No, he dash lochem beloy lenochem. Remember, you're not allowed to invite going to your house because you might cook for them. You're not allowed to cook for going. There's no heter to cook for somebody else who doesn't have the mitzvah of Yom Tov. So Rav, that's what he says. That's what Aisha says. Rav says, I'll tell you what Pshat is. So you Rav Aisha say this man chagiga means the oilus riyah. Why is it called man chagiga at the same time? It's concurrent with the chagiga, which is the korban oila, and that the korban oila you also delay because it's followed by Shammai. Now we're not very happy to learn that it's Stam Bryce is by Shammai unless you have no choice. So a couple of generations later comes along Rav. Now we did learn before there were two Rav Aishas. But a couple of generations later, comes along Rava. So we're not sure which Rava is the first one. Rava comes along and says, Chagiga, Kozman, Chagiga, Ma'achin, Tfei Loi. We're not talking about a korban oila, we're talking about Chagiga. That's why it says Man Chagiga. So what's the difference between Chagiga and Zman Chagiga? He's telling you Chagiga, if you don't bring the first day, you can bring the other days. If it falls on a Shabbos, you don't bring on Shabbos, bring the other days. But there's a limit. What's the limit? Cold man Chagiga Ma'achi. You can only bring it during the entire Yom Tov, including Shmei Atzeres. But Feiloi, beyond that, you cannot bring it anymore. That's what it means, Man Chagiga. We're not even talking about Oilas Riyah. Now we learned, Mishalei Chag B'Yom Tov, Yishachag, we learned Chagiga, whoever didn't bring the first day Yom Tov, Chagig, B'Oilas Kol Kuli. You can bring it the entire Yom Tov. The Yom Tov Acher Chag, including, you can also bring it on Shmei Atzeres. Once Shmei Atzeres goes by and you did not bring the Karma Chagiga for Sukkot, it's too late. And we have this many times. Rav Ashi comes in during the conversation, which is impossible because as Rashi learns in Margita, Rav Ashi was born the day Rabbi passed away. But this is how the conversations continued on for many generations. And Rav Ashi says, I'll tell you what I think Pshat is. Chagiga, the Cholz Man Chagiga Ma'achin. We're talking about the Yom Tov Shavuos. Because Shavuos, you would have thought was only one day. So he says it at the Yom Tov Shavuos. What do you mean? Cholz Man Chagiga. That if the first day Shavuos falls on Shabbos, and the whole Yom Tov is only one day, yet nevertheless, you can have 7 days to make it up. Even it's one day, you can delay it. You have 7 days to bring it up. That's what it means. That's the Chiddush Kol Zman Chagiga. We're talking about a specific Yom Tov Shavuos. Now, we learned in the Mishnah, so we had a machlekes if Shavuos falls out on Friday. Beis Shammai says, when are you going to shech? Shabbos, of course, you can't. But Beis Shammai holds you're not allowed to shech on Friday either. He says that you cannot bring a korban oila sevilla on the first day Yom Tov. So what you do, you cannot bring it on Friday because the oila sevilla is lachem v'loila gvoya. You cannot bring it on Shabbos, so you bring it only on Sunday. So Sunday is called Yom Tovayach, the day of Shechita. And Beis Hillel says there is no Yom Tovayach. If it falls on a Friday, if it falls on a Shabbos, of course, but if they bring it on Sunday, so it's called Yom Tovayach, the day of Shechting. But if it falls on a Friday, Beis Hillel says bring it on Friday. There's no reason to wait to delay it. But everyone is minded that if Shavuos fall on a Shabbos, even Beis Hillel is minded. But if Shavuos fall on a Shabbos, then you cannot shecht on Shabbos. Yom Tovayach, which is the day of Shechting, Achar Shabbos, the day after Shabbos. So that's what it means over here. Man Chagiga means that Shavuos has a full 7 days afterwards to make it up. Rebbe Notan Tia Purim. Rebbe actually planted trees on Purim. Now he did work on Purim. The Rochat, and he bade Bekroino Shel Tzipoide, the market day of Tzipoide, which was a city on the mountain in Tveria, and he bade himself B'Shivasa B'Tammuz on Shivasa B'Tammuz itself. No, not only did he bathe himself to Shivasa B'Tammuz, he made sure that everybody's aware. Ubikesh Lakay Tisha B'Av, and he wanted now. Remember, we had the Gemara Rosh Hashanah that the fast days, it was optional. Whether you fast except Tisha B'Av, everything was optional. So Rebbe could have eaten, not only just bathed himself, but he could have eaten as well. Nevertheless, since we took it, says the Rosh Hashanah, we took it upon ourselves to fast all of these fast days, but we didn't take it to the extreme. We only took it that we're not going to eat, but we didn't take it upon ourselves not to take a bath or take a shower on Shivas B'Tammuz. And the last thing he did was, Ubikesh Laka Tisha B'Av. He wanted to uproot the Tisha B'Av. And they didn't concede to him. That they disagreed. No, they disagreed about he didn't Tisha B'Av. So Rab Abba, and we'll talk about Purim soon. Rab Abba said, Rebbe lekacha ma'aseh. Rab Abba said, my friend, that's not exactly what happened. Of course, Rebbe wouldn't undermine Tisha B'Av the way you understood it. It was on a Shabbos, the Chinul Achar Shabbos, and they pushed off to Sunday. Came along Rebbe and said, it's a nitche. Rebbe said, you know what? Since it's a nitche anyway, let's cancel Tisha B'Av for the year. Like this is coming. Chacham didn't agree. They said, so what if it's a nitche? You have to follow it. So then he said, it's always better to have two than one. By me repeating the story to you, you were able to clarify what actually happened. I've learned the truth. Taisha says, how can we even have a Havamin that Rebbe decided to cancel Tisha B'Av? The Gemara said it was on a Shabbos and Nitche, so it was canceled anyway. And the question was whether you have to do it on Sunday. But the way he initially understood is that Rebbe came along and canceled Tisha B'Av. How can he do that? We learned the Gemara at the end of Tainus, whoever eats and drinks on Tisha B'Av will never see the Nechama of Yerushalayim. And Tisha B'Av, it was never optional. And we learned that a Bezin cannot come along and overturn what an earlier Bezin, previous Bezin did. So what happened here? The Gemara says, Tosfos gives two answers. One answer is he didn't want to cancel Tisha B'Av. He just didn't feel that Tisha B'Av needs all the chumras, that bathing and all of these, the inuyim. Maybe you just don't eat. But Tosfos gives another interesting answer. Rebbe didn't want to cancel Tisha B'Av. He wanted to paskin like his student Rabbi Yochanan, that Tisha B'Av should have been on the 10th day of Av because the fire raged. The bulk of the fire was on Yud Av, and therefore Rebbe wanted that Tisha B'Av should actually coincide with Yud B'Av. That's what he wanted to do. And it seems from Tosfos that's not considered canceling an edict from a bezin. He's just massaging it, and that maybe you're allowed to, even though you're not greater with Chachma Min, which is a big chiddush of Tosfos. Anyway, the Gemara. Rebbe, let's go back to Purim. Heichi, not Purim. How can you go ahead and work and plant the Purim? But Rabbi Yosef say it says that the Eden who know open cities, they celebrated the 14th day of the month. They did Simcha Umishte v'Yomtiv. They did a Yomtiv. What's a Yomtiv? And so he explains. Rabbi Yosef came along and says Simcha Mishte v'Yomtiv. Simcha Melamed Shasuri Behesped. Now I'll eulogize. Mishte is Melamed Shasuri Betayim. Now I'll fast the Purim. And Yomtiv Melamed Shasuri V'Zilochi. Now I'll work a Purim. So how can I ever go ahead and plant these trees? So Gemara says, first thing Gemara initially says, Rebbe bar Arbeisa. Rebbe lived in an open wall city. And he planted, it was the 15th day when only walled cities celebrated Purim. So when it says it was on Purim, it wasn't Purim for him, it was Purim for the walled city for Shalayim. And therefore they're able to do that. So it's not so simple, but we learned whatever you do on the 15th, you have to do on the 14th. But first of all, before we get to that, Rebbe lived in Tveria. And we know that technically Tveria is a day that they kept. It was considered walled city time, and we'll soon see whether that's so or not. Rebbe, forget, you're right. Rebbe bar Chamesa, but Rebbe was a 15th dayer because he lived in Tveria. But the Chinata bar Beisa, for him it wasn't Purim, but for others it was Purim. So therefore, that's what happened. So again, are you so convinced that Tveria is definitely a 15th dayer? Well, Chizki wasn't doubt. He read Tveria Bi'ar Beisa Ubechamesa, 14th and 15th, because we're not sure, as we'll see in the bottom of the page. The Misapkala, he wasn't sure. Whether it is or it isn't. Says the Gemara. Chizki Taka wasn't sure what Tveria is, but Rebbe was 100% sure. Tosfos said that Rebbe lived in Tveria. That's when all the stories are in the times of Antoninus. When they were together was when they were in Tveria. Says about even so, even let's say he knew 100% that Tveria was a day number 15. Does that give him license to work and deploy people on day number 14? Well, Ksiva says because Tainus, as Yema Ba'asa, the Yom Chamisha also Purya Inun, they both days are treated like Purim, the mitzvah when you should make a eulogy. So we see that we treat, but even if you're, let's say, a person living in Shalayim, you still have to conduct the 14th day like it's Purim. And since Purim, we said before, it's Yom Tov, you're not allowed to work. How did Rebbe work on the 14th, even though he belongs to Tveria, which is the 15th? Says the Gemara, whatever was also on the 15th, on the 14th. The Gemara says that's limited. Hani mili behesped tiny. Now fast now. Eulogy, you don't say tachon. Ava malacha yemech b'shulei. But working, you're right. You're not allowed to work on Purim, but it's only the day, not the day prior or the day post. So when it's not so, Rav Chazil Gavra, Rav once saw this person that was kashodi kistin the Purim that he was planting flax on Purim, but and he cursed him. Well, like nothing grew. Like kistin, and it didn't grow. So we see now I'll do any work. The Gemara already asks and back, what are you talking about? The Hasan Bar Yoma, but that was the day. That was the day. That person did not plant the day, the other day. He planted on his day of Purim. That's why he was cursed. Very difficult to understand what exactly the question was that you need this answer. Where do you see in the story? It's Rabbah. The second answer that tells us Rabbah Brei the Rabbah, Rabbah the son of Rabbah says, Afil Tema b'Yoma. Even if you want to say that it was the other day, that it was, let's say, not the day of his Purim, but it was the other day. Nevertheless, Hesped v'Tainas Kebilayim Melocha leKebilayim. That is important. That there is no Isser of working on Purim. And it says clearly Yom Tov, so he says back, you're right. Initially, they proposed to declare it a Yom Tov, which means you cannot work. Melocha leKebilayim. But when the Eden accepted upon themselves Purim, nowhere does it mention Yom Tov. The Mekorak, see, initially it said that they took upon them that they celebrated Simcha Umishte v'Yom Tov. Later on, when it legislates on how it should be, that a future generation, this is what you do. It says, La says, you should make them days Mishte v'Simcha. But Yom Tov, let's mention a word about Yom Tov. That they never took upon themselves. No, so if it isn't Yom Tov and you're allowed to work on Purim, so why did the Rav curse somebody who was planting seeds of flax? Well, Rav, my time allowed to God, why did he curse that person? Because the meaning of that city was not to work on Purim. And Dvorim Hamutorim, it was a thing that was permitted for him, but others conducted no Isser. But with Rebbe, so where Rebbe lived, there was no meaning he was allowed to work. When that person was planting the seeds, the meaning was that they should not work. So therefore, he was cursed for what he did. Therefore, was cursed. Says the Gemara. That's what's good about that. No, or we can say that no, even in Rebbe's place, the meaning is not to work on Purim. So how can Rebbe plant it? But if you remember the Gemara, Tain is a different kind of plantings, and we said just like in other, you have to increase simcha, or you have to might simcha all the way around, of you might of your increase, and what's in the might simcha? We said over there in the tia shel simcha. And that is what he was exactly what he was doing up Purim. And the Gemara they described what's in a tia shel simcha or a binya shel simcha. What he planted was trees of simcha. Now we learned it didn't rain for such a long time. They still didn't receive a response. You reduce your business, binyan also in building with a tea and planting. The in getting engaged and getting married. We learned binyan shel simcha. What's a binya shel simcha? The tia shel simcha. Binya shel simcha. What's a binya shel simcha? Says the Gemara is a haboine based chasnus lebnoy. If somebody builds a house for his son, when someone get married, he would build them a house. But interesting, Rashi says lebnoy harish. It seems that only the b'chor they used to build a house. The Gemara doesn't say anything about firstborn son. It sounds like he did for every son. It seems that he used to buy an apartment only for the oldest son. And they used to make a chuppah in that house itself, and having more sukkah of the ain't simcha makom chuppah. That was the house that was built. That was their house. So that's a base simcha. And in the tia shel simcha was, if you say going hanakeya abulikishem malachim. That was a tree that they built with. It provided a lot of shade, and they used to put it on these pieces of wood like a pergola, and they sit there and spend the time there. That's what Rebbe did. That you can do on Purim. Gufa, let's go back to Tveria. Chizki, Kari B'Tveria, but basically he didn't sure, he wasn't sure. He read 14, 15, Mesapla, he wasn't sure. In Mukev Chaim Yeshunun, I lie. Says the Gemara, he wasn't sure. Even though the big Machlek is a Shem city, we're not sure if there's a walled city around it. What are you supposed to do? And many say, Safir Rabban Lakula, you only read the 14th. The Rambam says you read them both. That's what the Balmar says. The Rambam says you read them both, the 14th and the 15th, but you don't make a bracha on both. And yet here by Tveria, it clearly says it's a suffix, you make a bracha on both. Here, the suffix is not whether there was a wall. The suffix is halachically, do we treat the sea like a wall, as Gemara will explain, which is very different. A suffix in halacha, so therefore the Rambam says, Yemachmi, you do both days, and so on. Others say that if a suffix of Purim is not a suffix Rabban, it's a suffix Divrei Kabbalah, and therefore you have to be machmir. And sorry, that's what the Balmor says. And you have to therefore do it 2 days. Like the Bes Yosef Shulchan Aruch and Tafrei Tzaddik Zayin Paskins, that Purim is like Mahat Torah. It's Divrei Kabbalah, Kedivrei Torah. And therefore, an oin is allowed to eat meat and drink wine, even though an oin shouldn't, because this is a mitzvah in the Torah. It's a asay de rabbim, a mitzvah of Klal Yisrael, which is far greater than your personal asay. So then if you follow that line of thinking, then you have to read on both days where you have a suffix, not just in halacha, but even generally, there's a wall around it. Now, what's the story with Tveria? What's a suffix? First thing, what it says, Mimisakli is a suffix. The Tveria, Vaksiv, it's a clear pasuk where it says that the following cities had walls around them, and it says over there, it said, it says all of these places, they all had walls around them. We have a rule, that's called Tveria. And tomorrow we'll see why these cities were called by these names. So Gemara says, "High in the times up." You know what the suffix was? One side was the sea, and therefore not sure how do we treat the sea. So if that's the question, what's the question? Of course, the sea is not a wall. In fact, we know in the laws of Bate Arachema, which we discussed yesterday, a house in a walled city that you have 1 year to buy it back, and after that you forfeit your rights. What's considered a walled city? We learned over there that it has to be a wall, and not, let's say, that doesn't have a wall on its own. Let's say the houses are all so close to each other, we can count all the roofs like a wall. That doesn't count. And the same thing as sea is not considered a saviv. And what does saviv mean? All around, circling all around. by a Batir Chaima. Prat Tveria Sheyamachamasa. One side is the sea. So clearly, by Batir Chaima, we see the sea is not a wall. So what's the question? Says you're right. Over there, there's no question. Our question is only regarding Megillah. And why is that? What is the difference between prozin, my mukafechem? What's the difference between a prozin, open city, or a walled city? The Chesivi got Mikra Megillah. It says, Alkain Hayuhudim ha-prozin. What's the difference between a prozin and a yesh? Megilah is the vort because a walled city is closed off and it's concealed. So behind Nami Megilah, well, we have an ocean, you're exposed. Everybody can see. The difference is that if you have a walled city, you're protected. If you have an open city, you're not protected. Well, the water also protects them. And that's what the suffix is. A halachic question. Rab Asi Kori Megillah. Rab Asi read the Megillah Behutzel Ba'arbeis on the 14th, or the Chametz on the 15th. Mesapkle, he wasn't sure. Imu Kefes Chaimim Shununi Iloi. Big machlek is if Hutzel is considered part of Eretz or not. And this is in the Gay. We discussed a walled city outside Eretz. Do you read on the 15th or not? Ikidam, the others say, Amar Avasi, Hi Hutzel, the base Benyamim, Mukefes Chaimim. Here it sounds like Hutzel. This Hutzel here is Eretz Yisrael. And that's why he said Beis Yamin. It doesn't mean the previous Hutzel was the same question. But anyway, he says Hutzel, Beis Yamin, had a wall from time to shore. Amr Rabbi Yehuda says, Ki Havina Talia. I remember when I was a little kid, a little sheep. I mean, Milsa, I said something to She'il Savi. We asked the older people. It turned out to be that I was right. I said that in that pasuk there where we mentioned those cities that had a walled city, one of those places called Chemas. I said that's Tveria. The Loma Niklish Chemas. If it's Tveria, why refer to it as Chemas? Al Shemcha Tveria, because they had the hot water of Tveria there. And Rekas Utzipedi, and the other city goes Rekas, that's called Tzipedi. But Loma Niklish Rekas, why called Rekas? From the medallia, because it's suspended Keraxa Denara, like the river there. So therefore, it's on top of the mountain, like the riverbanks. Which is higher than the river itself. The ocean is always below the riverbanks. That's why it's holding it back. So Tzipaidi is above everything. So it's that's the goal rekas. And Kinetis, that's a place called Kenoisa. Kinetis, the Masika Peda, and Kikola de Kinetis has beautiful fruits like the color of the Kinetis, like the hop, like the sound emitted by the hop. And then the Gemara is going to continue tomorrow through all of these places, why they have these different names. Okay, tomorrow night we'll learn Mitzvah half.